The idea that fire was stolen from the gods, the so-called fire theft myth, can be found all across the world. Anthropologists have found hundreds of versions. From Australia, Southeast Asia, Polynesia, Africa, South America, North America and more. Most of these stories have the following elements. There was a time when the people had no fire, preventing them to cook food and warm themselves. But then they discovered that either a supernatural being from heaven or a specific animal had fire. Then someone decides to steal it. Often the being is not happy with the theft and gives chase. But finally the thief escapes, bringing fire to humanity. The most famous versions are from Greece and India. In Greece, Zeus was not willing to share fire with humanity. But then the titan Prometheus, a friend of man, stole fire and brought it to humanity in a stalk of fennel, for which Zeus chained him to a rock and had a vulture eat his liver every day. And in the Indian version, fire was stolen from heaven by a divine figure called Matarishvan, who then brought the fire to Manu, the first man, who, by the way, was also the only survivor of a great flood. And this association of the fire theft and the flood myth is also found in many places, including Southeast Asia, North and South America. In tribal myths, it is often an animal who steals the fire. For instance, it is often the coyote in North American tales, or a bird in Australian tales. And the interaction of fire with these animals is often used to explain the fire-red color of these animals, and black spots are often interpreted as burn marks. In many Native American stories, there's even an entire chain of animals willing to help to retrieve the fire, giving the fire from one to the other, as they are being chased by the original possessor of fire. And in Polynesia, the god Maui, true to his nature as a trickster, did not bring fire, but instead tried to quench all fire on earth, and then also the fire possessed by the fire goddess. But she finally intervened by placing fire latent in every tree, and there it still is, waiting to be released by the rubbing of fire sticks. And we'll also discuss some theories of how the story ended up so far and wide. So we have a lot to get to. And if this material is valuable to you, please subscribe. And let's start. The so-called fire theft myth, in which fire is stolen from heaven or from some other supernatural place, is extremely widespread across the globe. A great collection of these myths was compiled by Sir James George Fraser in 1930 in his book Myths of the Origin of Fire. And that will be our main source for today. The fire theft myth can be found on every continent and in every climate. The cause of this is unknown, but generally two options are recognized. The first option is that these stories formed independently, based on how our nervous system, our brain, responds to the phenomenon of fire. It might have gone something like this. Of all things found on Earth, especially before modern technology, fire seems to be out of the ordinary. It seems like a heavenly substance, reminiscent of the light of the sun or the stars in the heavens. Compared to atomic matter, fire just doesn't seem to belong here on Earth. And from this it follows that it must have been stolen from heaven. The second option is that the story dispersed across the globe. If we take this seriously, then the story must be really old, because it is found in the most isolated corners of the earth. In that case, it must have been part of the mythology of the wave of people that left Africa between 70 and 50,000 years ago. For we know that this group populated the entire Earth, and all non-Africans are genetically related to this group. Let's now start with the two most famous accounts, the Greek and the Indian fire theft. In the oldest Greek versions, including the version of Hesiod from around 700 BC, the sky god Zeus hid fire from humanity. Yet the cunning titan Prometheus defied the gods and stole the fire from heaven and brought it down to humanity. During his descent, Prometheus concealed fire in a stalk of fennel. And he did this because fennel is filled with a dry substance that burns like a wick. And this was used in ancient times to carry fire from one place to the other without it blowing out. For the theft, Zeus punished Prometheus by nailing or chaining him in other versions to a peak in the Caucasus. And then he sent an eagle that devoured his liver, or heart in other versions, every day, while this organ grew back at night, so that the eagle could do the same thing the next day. Prometheus endured this torture for 30, or in some versions 30,000 years, until he was at last rescued by the hero Heracles, named Hercules in Rome. Now about the reason Zeus kept back fire. We read that Prometheus was asked to decide which part of an animal sacrifice was for the gods, and which part could be eaten by humans. For this, Prometheus divided a sacrificial ox into two parts. One part had all the good stuff, but he covered it with the ox's stomach. And the other part was mostly bones, but he covered this with shiny fat. As predicted by Prometheus, Zeus chose the latter, falling right into his trap. But it turned out Zeus had allowed himself to be tricked, giving him an excuse to vent his anger on humans by withholding fire from them. Plato from the 5th century BC gives another version. Here the gods assign Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus the duty of equipping men and animals with powers. But the foolish Epimetheus bestowed all the gifts on the animals, while leaving men naked and defenseless. To correct for this, Prometheus stole fire from the workshop of Hephaestus, the smith of the gods. And according to yet another account, Prometheus obtained fire by lighting a torch from the sun. Now we move to the Indian version. Here fire, in the form of the fire god Agni, was brought from heaven by a divine figure called Matarishvan, and it was brought down to earth to Manu, the first man. We read in the 1500 BC Rig Veda, quote, "He," meaning Agni, the fire god, "whom Matarishvan brought to Manu from afar, the god he brought from afar." And Agni, him did Matarishvan lead here, from the far distance, stolen from among the gods. The point of this theft, we are told, is to allow humanity to perform sacrifices, for which the fire was needed. We read, "Agni, Matarishvan and the gods fashioned him as the means of sacrifice for Manu." The other element needed for the sacrifice was soma, which is an intoxicating drink pressed from a plant that was thrown into the fire as sacrifice. This soma was brought to Manu by a falcon, who stole it from a citadel in heaven, guarded by an archer named Crisanu. And the arrival of soma on earth allowed Manu to become the first sacrificer. We read, "Agni and soma. Matarishvan bore the one, namely Agni, here from heaven, while the falcon stole the other, soma, from the rock." Crucially, Manu earlier also survived a great flood. And as we shall see, the association between the flood and the fire theft is common worldwide. And by the way, in Greece, Deucalion became the survivor of the flood, for he built an ark after being warned by none other than his father, Prometheus, the fire thief. So here too, the flood and the fire theft are related. Now, let's go through a bunch of these stories from other cultures around the globe. And let's let a pattern emerge by itself. And by the way, this is by no means a complete list, for in that case I would have to go on for hours and hours. Let's start with Tasmania and Australia. The tribes of Tasmania speak of a time when there was no fire. But then, quote, "Two blackfellows came and threw fire like a star." The two blackfellows are in the clouds, and in the clear night you can see them like two stars, namely Castor and Pollux, or the constellation Gemini. These are they who brought fire to my fathers. In the myths from an Australian tribe from Gippsland, we also hear of a time when the people had no fire. As a result, the people were in distress, for they could not cook nor warm themselves. Fire was at the time in the possession of two women who had no love for humanity and therefore guarded it. A man who was friendly with humanity decided to steal the fire. He pretended to be very fond of the women and even managed to accompany them on their journeys. But then one day he ran off with the fire. And then, we read, the man turned into a little bird with a red mark on its tail, which, we read, is the mark of fire. And similar stories about a bird who stole fire can be found all over Australia, even in many distant parts. For instance, in northern Queensland, we read of a people who had no fire, but then a small wren, a bird, called Bingir Bingir, went up to the skies to get some. When the bird returned, he had no interest in sharing the fire, so he pretended not to have found it, but the red color of his tail gave him away. We also find in Australia the common theme of one animal possessing fire, while the other animals conspire to steal it for humanity. In one version, from the Bungandij tribe, a cockatoo named Mar, known from its red feathers reminiscent of fire, was the only one in possession of fire. The other cockatoos then killed a kangaroo and invited Mar over for dinner, and then asked him to use his fire to roast the kangaroo. When he did, a little cockatoo then put some grass in the fire and then flew off with it. Mar, angry about the fire theft, then burned down the whole country. In another related version, Mar was originally a man. Another man named Tatkana made a first attempt to steal his fire, but he failed and only got his chest burned. A second person did manage to steal some fire, but he accidentally set the entire grassland aflame. Upset that someone had stolen his fire, Mar then searched for someone to blame. He blamed Tatkana, the first man who had tried to steal the fire, because his red breast gave away his interaction with fire. And of course, Tatkana later turned into a robin redbreast, while our main character Mar again turned into a cockatoo. In more rare cases, the Australians believed that fire was obtained from the sun. In one version, a spear was thrown towards the clouds with a string attached to it. A man then climbed the string and then brought fire from the sun back to earth. And in another version, a man went to the hole in the earth, where they believed the sun descends at sunset. And there, close to the sun, he knocked the piece off, thereby obtaining fire. Sometimes we also read some plausible stories. For instance, we read of a thunderstorm that caused dry grass to catch fire. An old woman then took this fire home and kept it alight for the people. But during the wet season it went out, and as a result she was banished from the village. But she was allowed back when she discovered how to produce fire by rubbing sticks. The actual discovery of fire might have happened in a similar way. Now we move to the islands of the Torres Strait, north of Australia. Here an old woman named Serkar had 6 fingers on each hand, and she was the only one who possessed fire. Curious about the smoke that was coming from her house, the animals investigated and found that she could draw fire from her extra fingers. A lizard then caught the finger and ran off. The animals then each brought a branch from a tree that they liked best, and these trees received the fire. And from that time, we read, men could obtain fire sticks from these types of trees. And by the way, the idea that fire was produced from the body, and also the idea that an old woman possessed fire, and the idea that trees received fire are all common themes, as we shall see. Now let's discuss the fire legends from Southeast Asia. In New Guinea, we read of a divine figure called Aua Maku, who climbed a very large tree reaching high up into the sky where he built a house. Ahuamaku lived there with his daughter, Kau'u, who looked down to earth and saw a handsome young man named Maiku. They got married and she soon figured out that Maiku and his people had to leave crabs out in the sun instead of cooking them with fire, and this caused them to become ill. Then the father, Ahuamaku, looking down from heaven, brought fire to earth to help them out. And we read of Wagga Wagga, an old woman who possessed fire to roast yams, while the other people had to dry their yams in the sun. The woman, it turned out, took the fire from her body, in this case from between her legs. But one day, when she took out the fire to cook, a young boy stole it. Now let's move to Indonesia. In Indonesia, we hear that the people sent a messenger insect to heaven to obtain fire. The insect was given some fire by the gods, but it was not allowed to see how the fire was made. The gods told the insect to cover his eyes, but we read, he watched through the hidden eyes under his shoulders. Some curious Indonesian insect lore. And this way he brought the secret of making fire to humanity. We also hear in Indonesia that evil spirits, known as belas, were the only ones who possessed fire and wanted to keep it a secret. But one day a man convinced the wife of a bela to give him fire. She did, but she was not willing to show how it was made. A basket was then placed over his head, but he could see through the holes, and in this way brought the secret of fire to humanity. Now we move to the Andaman Islands, on which tribes lived for tens of thousands of years in near isolation. And here we read of survivors of a great flood who had taken refuge on a mountain. But the survivors immediately faced another problem, since because of the flood all fires had gone out. But luckily there was another mountaintop on which the creator god Puluga lived, and he did have fire. A ghost of one of the people who had died in the flood assumed the form of a kingfisher and then flew to the creator, and there the bird seized a burning log in his beak, but he dropped it on the creator. The god then hurled the log back in anger, but he missed the bird, and it fell instead near the survivors, allowing them to obtain fire. The Semang tribe of the Malay Peninsula, in and around Thailand, tell of a coconut monkey who stole fire from Karei, the supreme being who lives in the sky and causes thunder. But the monkey accidentally caused the savanna grass to light on fire, causing the hair of the people to singe, explaining the curly hair of the Semang. And in another place in Thailand there is a tradition of a great flood, which destroyed all of mankind except for one boy and one girl, who were saved in a gourd of all things. And when they later begot sons, one of them went up to the spirit of the sky and got some fire. But on his way back his torch went out. Then a gadfly was sent. He got some fire, but again the spirit was not willing to show how the fire was made. He then covered the gadfly with a basket, but he could see through the holes, a theme seen before in Indonesia. And when the gadfly left, his torch also went out, but in this case it didn't matter, for he had learned the divine secret of how to make fire and brought it to earth. Now we move north to southeast Siberia. Here the Buryats speak of a swallow who took pity on humanity and stole fire from Dinkgreve, who is in the sky. Dinkgreve, angry at the bird, shot at it with his bow. The arrow missed the body of the bird, but pierced its tail, and that is why the tail of the swallow is cleft in two. Now let's move to Africa. The Sun peoples of South Africa, genetically the most ancient branch of humanity by the way, tell of an ostrich who ate roasted roots and cooked watermelon, while the people had no fire. To hide his secret, the ostrich hid the fire beneath its wings. But the trickster god, Pi'ilsilkuagu, then convinced the ostrich to pick some fruit high up a tree, and this allowed the trickster god to steal the fire from under his wings, after which the trickster ran off. The ostrich then chased him, but the trickster threw thorny seeds on the ground, which the ostrich stepped on, causing him to lose 3 of his toes. In Namibia, we hear fire was stolen from a bunch of lions. And a tribe in Zambia tell how the mason wasp fetched fire from a god. First, the vulture and the fish eagle had tried to reach the god, but they failed to fly high enough and instead dropped to earth as bones after days of flying. The wasp, however, managed to reach the clouds and rested there, and there the god came down from heaven and met up with him. The wasp then begged for fire and was given some and brought it back to earth. A much more down-to-earth version comes from a tribe in the Congo, who simply told that fire was obtained when lightning struck a tree, that's all. But also in Congo, we read of a spider who spun a web and let it get caught by the wind, causing it to attach to the sky. Then a woodpecker climbed up the thread and pecked at the celestial vault, making holes that became stars. And then a man climbed up to the sky and took star fire with him to earth. In Nigeria, we read of a man called Lame Boy, who stole fire from the sky god Obasi Osa. When he reached the house of the sky god, he found people preparing food. He then secretly stole a glowing brand and ran off. And as punishment, the sky god crippled Lame Boy, explaining his name. And the last one from Africa. In Kenya, we read of a porcupine who was destroying crops. A man then wounded the animal with a spear, but it managed to escape into a hole. To retrieve the spear, the man crawled down the hole until he found himself in a place where many people were cooking food by a fire. He was then given some, and then returned to his village where he became chief. Now let's go to South America. The Mataco, a tribe in Argentina and Bolivia, claimed that the jaguar, a sacred animal, was in the possession of fire, but he was not willing to share it with humanity. A guinea pig then tried to get some, but the jaguar wouldn't let him, and as a result the guinea pig had to steal the fire. A tribe in Bolivia tells of a great flood, which only one little boy and girl survived, but all fires had gone out. Again, that same theme. But a large toad then came to help them. He had hidden in a hole during the flood and kept some burning coals there. A tribe in Brazil speaks of a great being called Monan. And after a great flood, only 2 brothers and their wives survived, but their fires had gone out. Luckily, Monan, the god, had saved some fire by placing it between the shoulders of a large sloth, explaining the red marks on its shoulders. We also hear of an old woman named Bella Nosamo, who had fire in her body and produced it whenever she wished to bake cakes, while the people instead had to bake their cakes in the sun. The people then begged for fire, but she refused, pretending that she had none. But they then seized her and squeezed the fire from her body. Now we move to the marvelous tales from Polynesia. The Maoris of New Zealand say that long ago the hero Maui attempted not to bring fire, but instead to quench it. He got up in the night and put out all fires in the cooking houses of each of the families in the village. The next morning he called his servants for food, but as expected, they reported back to him that they could find no fire. Maui then went to his mother and asked her where to go to get some fire. We read, "Follow that broad path that lies just before you, and you will at last reach the dwelling of an ancestress, namely the fire goddess Mahuika." When he reached that goddess of fire, she agreed to give him fire. She did so by pulling out a nail, and then fire flowed from it. Yet when Maui was a short distance away, he put the fire out on purpose. And then he returned for more fire until she had only one nail left. Then finally, the old woman understood what was going on. We read, "This fellow is surely playing tricks on me." She then pulled out her last nail and threw it on the ground, causing the whole place to catch fire. She then cried out to Maui, "There, you have it all now." Maui ran off, but the fire followed him. He then changed himself into an eagle, but the fire still almost caught him. He then flew into a pool, but it almost boiled. Then he called on two ancestors to send down water, quenching all fire. Yet luckily, the fire goddess did manage to save a few sparks of the fire, which she threw into various trees, where this fire is still hidden to this day and can be drawn out by friction. A beautiful tale. On the Hervey Islands, we read that Maui was installed as one of the guardians of the upper world, the place where mortals live. And like the mortals, he subsisted there on uncooked food, for they had no fire. Maui's mother, Buataranga, who lived in the underworld, would occasionally visit him from the underworld, but she would always eat apart. But then one day Maui peeped into her basket and discovered some cooked food. Wanting to know what was going on, he followed her secretly into the underworld. Maui borrowed a pigeon and then turned into a dragonfly and hopped on the back of the pigeon, allowing him to fly by the demons guarding the gate to the underworld. Once he reached his mother, he told her that he came to learn the secret of fire. She told him to go to the fire god, Mauiki. Maui quickly found his house as a column of smoke was rising from it, and inside he found the god busy cooking food in his oven. 3 times he received fire from the god, but each time he extinguished it in a stream on purpose. Maui did this because he had no interest in just fire. He wanted to learn how to make it. When Maui returned for the 4th time, Mauiki got so angry he threatened to throw Maui into the air. But Maui accepted the challenge and swelled himself into an enormous size. Mauiki then seized Maui and hurled him as high as a coconut tree, but he fell to the ground without hurting himself, while the fire god lay panting for breath. And now it was Maui's turn. Twice he threw the fire god much higher to a dizzy height and then caught him like a ball. Then, defeated, Mauiki told him how to make fire from coconut fiber and bundles of fire-yielding sticks through friction. And as revenge for his trouble, Maui then set the house of Mauiki on fire, and soon the entire underworld was in flames, but Maui managed to escape. The flames, however, followed him up into the upper world, but there the people succeeded in putting it out. The people also kept some of the fire for themselves, but it soon went out. But then Maui took compassion on humanity and told him the secret of how to make fire. The fire theft is also very common among the Native Americans. The Sia Indians of New Mexico say that the spider, named Susistinako, was the creator of all living things. He dwelt in a house underground, and there he made fire by rubbing a sharp pointed stone on a round flat stone, but he hid the secret from others. To protect his secret, he had various animals guarding his house, but a coyote waited till all the guards were asleep and then sneaked past them. He then lighted the cedar brand, which he fastened to his tail, and then he escaped to the upper world. And as we shall see, a piece of wood attached to the tail of an animal, which then caught fire, is also a common theme in America. The Navajos of New Mexico claim the animals were first in the possession of fire, but then the coyote, the bat, and the squirrel were willing to obtain fire for humanity. The coyote, again, tied splinters of pine wood to his tail, then ran through the fire, causing the splinters to catch fire. He ran off, pursued by all the other animals until he was tired. He then handed the fire to the bat and finally to the squirrel until the fire was safely carried to the Navajos. The Jicarilla Apaches of New Mexico claim that humans in the past had no fire. A fox then helped them to steal fire from a bunch of fireflies. The fox invited them over for a feast and then encouraged them to make a campfire, which they ignited by their own glow. The fox then attached shreds of wood to its tail, put it into the fire and then ran off. Sparks from that fire fell off and were then absorbed by trees. When the fox was tired, he handed the fire over to a hawk, and the hawk later to a brown crane. The brown crane got very far, but he did not reach one type of tree, and that tree, we read, will still not burn to this day. The Sioux and related tribes speak of a great flood, which only one man and one woman survived by taking refuge on a mountain. Yet all fires had gone out. The so-called Master of Life, a divine figure, then sent a bird, which brought fire to humanity. The Korak of California speak of the creator god Karea, who had made both men and animals, but he had not given them fire. Instead, he had hidden it in a casket, which he had given to two old hags to guard. The coyote, who was friendly to the Karak, managed to seize a brand with his teeth, after which the hags gave chase. To escape, the animals were arranged according to their strength, the strongest one closest to the fire. First, the lion took over the brand, then the next animal, and so on, each animal barely having time before the hags caught up to them. When the ground squirrel got the fire, his tail caught fire, and he curled it up over his back, explaining the black spots which we see to this day. The last in line was the frog, but he could not run, so he opened his mouth wide, and the squirrel threw the fire in, and the frog swallowed it. The hags then seized the frog by its tail, but the tail broke off, explaining that frogs lose their tail after their tadpole stage. The frog then swam underwater as long as he could. He then came up and spat out the fire into a log of driftwood, and there it has stayed ever since, so that when two pieces of wood are rubbed together, fire comes forth. The Tolowa of California also tell of a great flood with one pair surviving on a mountaintop, but without fire. The spider natives and the snake natives then hatched a plot to steal fire from the moon. The spider natives wove a spider silk balloon, allowing them to reach the moon. There they found the moon natives. They persuaded them to gamble, and during the game, the snake natives stole the fire and ran off. The Nlaka'pamuk of British Columbia speak of a coyote who saw a light far away to the south, which turned out came from the house of the fire people. With many good runners, including fox, wolf, and antelope, he reached the house. Coyote then invited them for a dance. He made himself a headdress of yellow pine shavings, with long fringes of cedar bark reaching to the ground. Coyote then danced wildly until his headdress took fire. He then pretended to be afraid and ran out, after which the fire people pursued him. When tired, Coyote gave his headband to Antelope and so on. The fire people caught up with the animals and killed them one by one, until only Coyote was left. He nearly got caught, but ran behind a tree and gave fire to it. And after that, fire was in the trees. The Sandpoil speak of a chickadee, a bird, who shot an arrow which stuck in the sky. He then continued to shoot, making a chain of arrows, by means the animals could climb up. And there the animals found that the people of the sky had fire. They then stole it, and together managed to escape. Finally, we'll end with some European folk tales. In Normandy and Brittany there exists a tale of a little wren that went to the good God in heaven to obtain fire. There the bird rested on the god's knees. The god at first hesitated to give her the fire, saying, "You'll burn yourself," but he finally gave it. He then told the bird not to fly too fast, as this would cause its wings to catch fire. Initially, the bird did what was told, but when she almost reached his friends, she sped up out of excitement. As a result, she burned all her feathers. But then she got feathers from the other birds, which explains why she is speckled. And in central France, we read of a wren that stole the fire of heaven. But during his descent, his wings caught fire, and he was forced to give the fire to the robin redbreast. But soon its breast got burned, forcing him to give the fire to the lark, who finally carried it to humanity. And there we have it. That was quite a sit. An overview of the worldwide fire theft myth. I hope you were inspired by all this. And if you want to know more about world mythology or any other topic from world history, then read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. And of course, subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.